Now, this, folks, this is where it gets really interesting, and I'm very excited to describe and explain all of what we're looking at here, mainly because I don't want to make it appear as though I am a teacher of sorts, but more so because I feel like all of us collectively, including myself, have come to a point in which we can now say, okay, we understand the basic concepts of what seems to be going on, whether it's the extraterrestrial angle, whether it's the spiritual angle, whether it's the political angle that's going on the surface level of things within this dimension, in the physical realm, this density, whatever you want to call it. So, welcome back, folks, to another Let's Get Banned. I think it's been 2 or 3 weeks since we've done a Let's Get Banned. Today's title is called, Is the Intellectual Dark Web a PSYOP? Interphasic Inversion Fuels the Hologram, and E.B.W, which stands for Electron Beam Welding for the Chimera Group, and Witching Hour. And I need you folks to please bear with me as I go along with what we'll be looking at here, and it all sort of ties in. So let's go step by step, very fundamentally, very strongly. Wikipedia.org. The intellectual dark web is a loosely defined informal group of commentators who oppose what they regard as the dominance of identity politics, political correctness, and cancel culture in higher education and the news media within Western countries. Those who have been linked to the intellectual dark web are generally critical of what they perceive as conformist liberals, and some have even been associated with the alt-right, end quote, of the political spectrum, end quote. Okay, long story short, the intellectual dark web was loosely founded by this gentleman right over here, Eric Weinstein. Some of you may be familiar with him. I've brought him up in the past before. He's also the same gentleman who was who coined the term the disk theory, the distributive idea suppression complex. Essentially, that there's not a bunch of men all the time or women in one dark shady room making all the plans for all of us and all that, but there's a loose conglomerate of individuals across multiple industries that understand a certain narrative must be kept, and they're taught this and bred this from the beginning. So it's a little bit, it mixes real world with what we would coin, conspiratorial thinking, if you will. Now, essentially, the intellectual dark web is a group of individuals, actually very similar to yourself and myself, I would say, in a lot of ways, that do agree with certain, political actions and moves made, especially in America, by the Democrats or the Republicans, or in Europe, the right or the left. This is not a political episode, but I need to explain this in order for you folks to sort of grasp what's really happening here. So the intellectual dark web takes a little bit of every perspective from every different angle of things. Okay, capitalistic, communistic. I know that sounds a little bit frightening, but just bear with me. Again, a little bit of the far right, a little bit of the far left, a little bit moderate right, a little bit moderate left, and they take the center view. They believe, though, however, that this duopolistic infighting is causing a lot of friction and damage and harming not just the country, but the mental health, the economic health of the world, really, right? Because the influence from the West seems to disseminate across all of Europe, across Australia, Asia, although, we could say that China's hampered down lately on Western influence, and so has Russia. But point being, there are people like you and I who essentially say we gotta think outside the box. But here's the thing as to why I say in the title, is it a PSYOP? Because these here are individuals, like such as we see over here, Barry Weiss, Eric Weinstein, as I mentioned, Sam Harris. I'm sure a handful of you have heard of these individuals. They tend to be known as free thought thinkers, so to speak, thinking of, fresh ideas in psychology and politics. They walk right up to that line of coming up with an alternative to the traditional duopolistic political system, but they never cross it. And listen, I'm not one to judge, okay? Because honestly, they could very easily say back to me, hey, Dave, who are you? You're just a kid who's judging us. And I would say, you know what? Fine, granted. You make a very good point. The reason I bring this up, though, is because I feel as though, and I see, based on the different interviews they do, that individuals like Sam Harris and Eric Weinstein want to cross a particular line, but they won't. Is it because of some type of physical or esoteric corruption that they're familiar with? Why do I say this? Because you might say, Dave, you're just making stuff up and asking random questions. Well, is it a coincidence that Eric Weinstein is now a part of the Galileo Project with Avi Loeb, looking for, the Harvard astronomer with the Oumuamua, please forgive me if I mispronounced that, or Oumuamua, I forgot, anyways, that cigar-shaped alleged craft that Mr. Avi Loeb, the Harvard astronomer, thinks is alien, and that we now have Avi Loeb joined with Lou Elizondo. And isn't Sam Harris, over here, the same individual? He's also a neuropsychologist, I believe, or neurologist, please forgive me if that's not accurate, but Sam Harris is the same individual who was approached by individuals within the government to consult and ask advice on, allegedly, how to deal with this alien disclosure and how to tell it to the public in a way that the public would be able to comprehend. Do you see what I'm saying here, folks? How come it's so coincidental that the vast majority of the individuals in this intellectual dark web, this sort of loose group, if you want to call it, are the same individuals being approached for this whole extraterrestrial phenomenon? Could it have to do with some type of what we see over here? Let me pull up very quickly. Excuse me. What is called precognitive sentient intelligence. Okay, sorry, I should have had that written down so I would have remembered, but precognitive sentient intelligence. That's what's very interesting about all of this, okay? Now, what we'll see here is that MysteryWire.com, former military intelligence officer pursues supernatural phenomenon. Dr. John Alexander was a Special Forces combat commander during the Vietnam conflict, rose to the rank of lieutenant colonel in Army intelligence, and worked directly with the Army's remote viewing program to train psychic soldiers. But hold on a second. Quick little side note, I thought the remote viewing program was shut down. But you see all of these individuals, that these veterans that were involved in these remote viewing programs that have allegedly been called as well interfacers, for those on Patreon that know we've discussed this lately in our group Zoom calls, they've never denied it. They've always said when asked about remote viewing, listen, I'm not going to go there. I'm not going to comment on that. Clearly something must work if they never shut the program down. But you see how they go from, and when I say they, I'm talking about the media. They go from, again, oh, there was a remote viewing program to, 10, 15 years ago. This is nonsense. What is this remote view? What are you talking about here? Whenever a journalist would ask an Army official or general, do you have a remote viewing program? They would dismiss it. So which one is it? What's the answer? Again, it's the military-industrial complex and the military media complex using and harnessing the dissemination of this information to go right up to that line, but not cross it. You see what I'm saying? Even in a military sense. What does that remind us of? The people we just looked at right here on the intellectual dark web. They go right up to that line, but they never cross it. So let's jump back right over here. Rose to the rank of lieutenant colonel in Army intelligence and worked directly with the Army's remote viewing program to train psychic soldiers. He created an internal Pentagon program to locate UFO documents and witnesses. Later, Dr. Alexander served as director of non-lethal weapons research at Los Alamos National Labs. Oh yeah, by the way, he's a crazy guy. He's entrusted to defend our country. He was then put in charge of as director of non-lethal weapons research at Los Alamos National Lab, the same lab that allegedly reverse engineered a lot of these extraterrestrial craft. No, but he's not important. Don't worry about it, right? Again. He was also a consultant to businessman Robert Bigelow in the creation of NIDS, the National Institute for Discovery Sciences, which investigated UFOs, animal mutilations, Skinwalker Ranch, and survival of consciousness after death, which ultimately worked in correspondence with Dr. Eric Davis, Hal Puthoff, Jim Lakowski with OSAP and ATIP running out of the Pentagon. Okay, now what we'll see here. Dr. Alexander has written several books about modern warfare, UFOs, and paranormal mysteries, and in recent years has traveled the globe investigating psychic healing, shamanic experiences, and altered states of consciousness. This story originally... Okay, yada yada. All right, here we go. Now, Robert Bigelow installed a team of scientists and investigators from his NIDS on the property, from his National Institute for Discovery Science, and over the next several years, the team witnessed and documented dozens of high strangeness events, including daylight animal mutilations and nighttime encounters with an unknown intelligence. Alexander gave it a name: precognitive sentient phenomenon. Something else is in control, he said, end quote. Does this not remind us, by the way, of what Jacques Vallée has proposed here? Now, again, let's play devil's advocate. We could say, very strongly, these guys at NIDS, Robert Bigelow, he's a jokester, it's all part of one big psyop, what are these guys doing at Skinwalker Ranch? Nothing was ultimately found. Nothing was ever officially substantiated. Well, I'm saying if. I want to be very clear here. But if this concept of a precognitive sentient phenomena or intelligence, all right? Now, really think of that. Precognitive sentient phenomenon. If this is possible, if these beings do exist there, as has been described relative to other owners that used to own Skinwalker Ranch before and after Mr. Bigelow, it's possible that memories could have been erased. It's possible that something was encountered or things were encountered, as we've seen on security camera footage at Skinwalker Ranch over and over again. We have a good friend of the show, Lester Velez, who will be coming on very shortly, hopefully, who had said a handful of months ago that to his understanding, he was told off the record that underneath Skinwalker Ranch, there's some type of ancient fusion-type energy that is still activated there, hence the reason it acts as portals for UFOs, portals for different interdimensional beings, and things for ghosts, and, entry and gateways for different dense level ghosts, if you want to call it that. Not only that, but we could also talk about the fact that it could substantiate that of nuclear karma, as Dan Winter says, where when dropping nuclear bombs, okay, or splitting the atom, it doesn't have to be dropping a bomb, but splitting an atom, so to speak, whether in a large vicinity or in a contained vicinity, to the point where even maybe people in the public don't even know that an atom was split, you still bring a lot of these interdimensional beings closer and closer to the physical realm, which could justify this precognitive sentient phenomena. Something else is in control. Now, I wanted to do this live search with you folks. Again, what does this remind of? Remind us of, excuse me. Here we go. This reminds us of what Jacques Vallée said in one of his many books. Again, one of the founders of artificial intelligence and an astrophysicist who is also a consultant on what we were just reading right back over here. Excuse me. Right back here. Okay, so let's take a look. Human beings are under the control of a strange force that bends them in absurd ways, forcing them to play a role in a bizarre game of deception. All right, now you might be saying, Dave, we're talking big, big events here, big probabilities, big proposals. What does this have to do with the human angle of the intellectual dark web and these same individuals like Barry Weiss, Eric Weinstein, Sam Harris, you name it, right? Jordan Peterson, we can argue very strongly as well. Even Joe Rogan sort of floats and hovers in those circles as well. Many people have said the intellectual dark web from a culture standpoint, because they have had, Telegram groups. They've had many different groups. Discord servers to discuss this. It's interesting that the intellectual dark web seemed to sort of die or fade off, and this is no knock to any of these individuals. You guys are way smarter than me, let me just say. But it seemed that the intellectual dark web started to die off just as the disclosure phenomenon was seeming to come in. Could this be part of that angle of what Mr. Jacques Vallée describes here as human beings under the control of a strange force that bends them? Again, bends them in absurd ways. Keep in mind the word bend. I don't think Mr. Vallée used that word lightly. I think that was intentional. Again, why didn't he say are under the control of a strange force that breaks them in absurd ways? Because, again, going back to free will, you can't break it, you can bend it though, right? Forcing them, meaning humans, us, to play a role in a bizarre game of deception. Oh, interesting. A bizarre game of deception. That's quite peculiar, such as maybe a precognitive sentient phenomena, right? It's very possible. I mean, we have to think of this. We have to consider all of this, right? Now, the next thing, all right, is this. Electron beam welding. We've covered this before, but we have to revisit it in my humble opinion, and you'll see why I say this. So, let's take a look. TWI-global.com. Electron beam welding is a fusion welding process whereby electrons are generated by an electron gun and accelerated to high speeds using electrical fields. This high-speed stream of electrons is tightly focused using magnetic fields and applied to the materials to be joined. The beam of electrons creates kinetic heat as it impacts with the workpieces, causing them to melt and bond together. It is performed in a vacuum environment, as the presence of gas can cause the beam to scatter. All right. Recent developments in electron beam welding machine technology have realized a local method of electron beam welding, whereby the electron beam gun is enclosed in a vacuum box on the other side of the material to be joined, rather than placing the entire workpiece inside a vacuum chamber. Okay, this is interesting because we then need to ask ourselves, what is, again, not electron beam welding. We need to understand interphasic space, okay? And we need to look at that in a way in which, ultimately, to be honest with you folks, is really going to take us to the next step of gathering what's happening here. So let's take a look at newspunch.com. CERN had an accident. It created a rainbow universe. All right. During warm-up procedures following a 2-year mandatory shutdown period for maintenance and repairs, physicists were startled to find an anomaly that lasted for 2.6 seconds. But did it really last for 2.6 seconds? Again, what is time relative to us? I'm not trying to sound all smartass here, or, be Mr. Smartass Dave, but really, what is time? Years for us could be 2.6 seconds for this universe. Could CERN have opened a parallel universe again within that of the year 2012? How interesting, how coincidental. Now, let's jump on to interphasic space. Let's look at what interphasic space is, and let's understand the core concepts of interphasic space before we ultimately head back to bringing this full circle. So let's do in real time a search here, interphasic space. I thought I had the tab open, but that's all right. It's also referred to as spatial interphase. Okay, for those on the members-only group Zoom call earlier the other day, you will know that we discussed this a little bit briefly. Spatial interphase, also known as interspace or an interphasic rift, was a phenomenon in which the fabric of space began to break up, allowing an overlap of parallel universes on different dimensional planes. The rift also contained a completely empty realm, devoid of life, between the dimensional planes. This is interesting because interphasic rifts have also been seen. Let's take a look. Research Gate interphasic. Watch this. Relationship between, let's see here, interphasic nucleolar organizer regions and growth rate in two neuroblastoma cell lines. Now, I'm not going to pretend like I know what that means to a T. However, what's interesting is that if we jump to the fact that it's very, very possible that telepathy, according to bentlights.com, is a form of quantum communication, we then must think, is there some form of telepathy using spatial interphase or, interphasic space to create pocket universes within this one? Now, I don't mean to confuse you folks. So, first, let me break down very simply what interphasic space is. All right? See this grid right here? Pretend this grid, folks. Let's do a quick little zoom in. Represents space and time. All right? Let's pretend it does that. It represents this. This is a pocket within space and time that rips open. So how I've always talked about and how we've discussed how these alien craft create a bubble around the craft that void them of space and time. This time around, it's not a bubble, it's a pocket. The best way I can describe in a real life example is, think of you're wearing a nice, beautiful pair of jeans, right? The surface of those jeans represent the world, the dimension you're living in right now, space and time. Now imagine you have a pocket zipper in those jeans. It's zipped up nice and tight, nothing's getting in there. And then you unzip the zipper, right? And then the pocket opens up. And obviously you can put your phone in there, whatever you got to put. That's exactly what's happening here. However, there's two different kinds of interphasic spatial rifts, which is that in some cases, when a pocket is opened up, it leads to another dimension or universe, if you will. And in other cases, it's literally a place where allegedly the military, and apparently human military, knows how to utilize this, not just the US, but other world governments, use to store information, ammunition, weapons, you name it, anything that they do not want the enemy to find out. Literally, folks, a scene out of Rick and Morty, when Rick takes his portal gun, opens a portal, throws whatever in there to hide stuff, then closes it. Literally that. In some cases, it's hiding it in a void space. In other cases, it's taking it to another parallel dimension or universe. Now, let's jump on back to, give me one quick second. This right over here. Dr. Eric Davis, rabbitha.com. Okay, now this is Dr. Eric Davis, the same one with the teleportation physics report, the same one with I was discussing that does work with Hal Puthoff, Robert Bigelow, Jim Lukatsky, you name it. So take a look at this right over here. He's also the same one who was in the Admiral Davis Wilson documents, the same one who sent his teleportation and traversable wormhole report and different propulsion aspects report to 6 Draco Drive and 10 Saturn Boulevard. It's this same guy, okay? He says, and I quote, "The psychic component of UFOs is the one that disturbs ufologists, many of them, not all of them, and it also disturbs your typical academic STEM, science, technology, engineering, mathematics scientists, because they consider psychic phenomenon to be fringe. And so it's a fringe topic, and they won't consider any reality to it or consider evidence that's been investigated on it or that's been collected on it. So poltergeist phenomena is always attached to UFO encounters. It is something that's not very well understood or recognized by many in ufology even, okay? Now, what's interesting about this, before I go on, is that poltergeist activity relative, all right, to UFO phenomenon and events occurring was brought up at some point, believe it or not, by a handful of individuals that have loose affiliations with, again, Eric Weinstein. Now, you could say, Dave, that's a very loose connection. You can make a lot of assertions and random alignments there. But bear with me, folks. Take a look. The really good scientific UFO groups that have existed since the 70s and 80s even ignored it. They just threw it out of any of their field investigations and case studies because it did not fit the model of what they believed UFOs or what they hypothesized UFOs to be. Before I go on, this is I guess you could say, exciting yet also scary. I'm hesitant to use the word scary, but I mean, humans fear what they don't understand. So if it's to the point where the UFO phenomena is just a nuts and bolts angle of something that we can't even comprehend, to the point where we need to really be truly unbiased and look at the data, what's happening. I don't care if it entails mind control, if it even fairies coming out of portals. We need to look at the raw data. But as Mr. Davis says here, even the best groups back in the day, 20, 30, 40 years ago, ignored it because they did not want it to be the case. Again, that cognitive dissonance of what you want versus what is really there, which is why what I always say all the time, if I am wrong about something, I'm happy to be told I am totally incorrect, because ultimately it's not about what I want, or even, to be honest, what any of us want. It's about what's there, right? So, and Eric Davis goes on, and Eric Davis says, because it did not fit the model of what they believed UFOs or what they hypothesized UFOs to be, and that is extraterrestrials from another planet. And unfortunately, that's not the truth. That's not the truth. The truth is, every time you have UFOs, you're going to have poltergeists associated with them. And I personally experienced it every time I came home from my trips to Skinwalker Ranch, and I brought that poltergeist phenomenon home. A couple of the DIA military, Defense Intelligence Agency military, uniformed officers who went to the ranch to get a feel for it, to see it and investigate it, also brought poltergeist phenomena home with them. And so it is a part of the psychic or level 5 characteristic or dimension of the UFO phenomena. And it's hard to understand why, but that's part of why we're trying to study it. What we're trying to find out why that is could be that, in fact, that telepathy may likely be a major component of the ufonauts who control these advanced technological devices, these technological vehicles, and telepathy might entail altered states of consciousness, manipulations of reality, and things like that get really exotic. And this is why physicists and ufologists, they're scared and they run from it. So unfortunately, it's the data that we collected at the ranch during the nearly 6 years I was there and the nearly 10 years that Colm Keller was there working for Bob Bigelow at NIDS. And then if you talk to John Schulzler, who's the former international director of MUFON, Mutual UFO Network, and you talk to, ironically enough, I didn't even know this was here, Jacques Vallée. Again, folks, Jacques Vallée, him, right? Oh, please forgive me. Who's published many books on that, you'll find that poltergeist phenomena or psychic phenomena is a key characteristic of UFOs. You can't get away from it, end quote. Now, a lot of people might say, okay, is Dr. Eric Davis trying to deceive the public? Is he telling a little bit of the truth while also being told to disseminate some disinformation relative to his security clearances, because he's got to do that, right? Now, interesting with this, however, though, is that he seems to assert that certain phenomena is exclusive to this planet and we should not be looking at other planets for this type of life. That does not mean that there is not other biological life out there, which then takes us to a handful of different proposals going back to CERN creating a rainbow universe, right? Now, this is when it gets complicated. I'm not trying to confuse you folks, but please bear with me. So you remember we looked over here at spatial interphase or interphasial space, where, you know, you create a pocket in space-time. Basically, like the zipper on a jeans, you throw something in there, you can close up that pocket, and then no one can ever get back to it. That is different, I want to be very clear, than a pocket dimension. A pocket dimension is something where, for example, it is a dimension that resides within a particular physical object that seems quite small externally, but once you walk inside of it, it's much, much bigger. Sort of like, you know, people saying they've been abducted and right before they've been abducted, they see a UFO craft or an alien craft looking to be about 50 meters in diameter, give or take, right? They go inside and it's like 20,000 square feet, literally. Now, we can argue the science is intercorrelated with respects to the interphasic or interphasic space and these pockets, but there's a vast difference in my humble perspective as to why this is the case. Allegedly, our species is on borrowed time, okay? What if CERN is creating these rainbow or pocket universes over and over to buy us more time, but they're running out of the space within this dimensional grid relative to the mind control grid these reptilians, alleged alpha draconian reptilians, have on us? Do you see what I'm saying? To defeat them, which is why this form of disclosure needs to come out, which could be why this concept of the intellectual dark web died out, because it would have stirred up too much controversy on the political angle in a time of philosophical ponderance and bringing everyone together. in a collective sense. Does that make sense, guys? I hope it does. If it doesn't, please on Patreon make the comment, because I know this will be this will be available long before this goes public for the on YouTube and all that. Now, what's interesting as well is that if we jump back to electron beam welding, it seems to infuse some part of the spatial interphasic pockets that tend to activate again this rainbow universe. All right. However, it does it in a way that seems to create some type of sentient plasma intelligence that remains within the creation of this pocket of the interphasic pocket universe, one new universe pocket created, so to speak. Whether it's a parallel or void inside is hard to say. Between that and the physical world of what's created in CERN. All right. Electron beam welding seems to merge those two together. Now, I could be incorrect. I could very strongly be incorrect, but let's take a look at this right over here. WeFreeThinkMag.wordpress.com. Vortex-based mathematics. Oh, how interesting. August 28, 2012. All of this around the year 2012. The mathematical fingerprint of God. All right. Marco Rodin, interesting, of course, the video is not available anymore. Marco Rodin has discovered the source of the non-decaying spin of the electron. Although scientists know that all electrons in the universe spin, they have never discovered the source of the spin. Oh, how convenient. Right? Again, I'm not trying to jab at or take a shit on, part of my English, any of the public scientists in academia that do genuine work. I get it. It becomes political. It's all about funding and they control the whole thing. But to the scientists that know and keep it a secret, that's what I'm referring to. Rodin has discovered the underpinning geometry of the universe, the fabric of time itself. He has done this by reducing all higher mathematics, geometry, calculus, and scalar math to discrete number mathematics. Again, discrete number mathematics. Does that not remind us of, again, gematria, the zodiac, cosmology, etymology, Micah, Ani, the series we have with both of those fine gentlemen? So let's take a look. With the introduction of vortex-based mathematics, you will be able to see how energy is expressing itself mathematically. This math has no anomalies and shows the dimensional shape and function of the universe as being a toroid or donut-shaped black hole. This is the template for the universe, and it is all within our base 10 decimal system. Again, interesting, base 10 decimal system is that one digit above the number 9. Again, the toroid field of the 9. All right, now, what's interesting as well is that the toroid field, the planet's a toroid field, right? A toroid field, for those that may not remember off the top of your head what it is, take a look, which is what Walter Russell also describes as well, that the human body emits this type of energy, right? Planets do, so why wouldn't the universe? Again, going back to Dan Winter's concept of the spin, the never-ending spin, the toroid field. Okay, so let's jump back over here. Let's see here. Very quickly, the potential scope and breadth of the Rodin solution is staggering. It is universally applicable in mathematics, science, biology, medicine, genetics, astronomy, chemistry, physics, and even computer science. Again, going back to quantum physicists finding the similarities between the internet and the composition of this planet, of this universe, and this dimension that we live in, rather. This gap space generates underpinning nested vortices, resulting in a far higher efficiency with no heat buildup. Okay, now keep that in mind. I want to make something very, very clear here. Okay, with no heat buildup. All right, take a look at this right over here. TechExplore.com. Form fit. Device wraps around hot surfaces, turns wasted heat to electricity. Could that not be what's... And oh, how convenient. Look, it has to be in a cylindrical format. Just like the toroid fields. Wrapping around a particular entity or form. Just like our universe, even our Milky Way galaxy is allegedly moving throughout the universe in a linear fashion, but there is a toroidal field wrapping around it. What is comprised of that energy seems to be that of electron beam welding, bringing those two different forms of the interphasic pocket dimension spaces into this dense realm. Why? I don't know. I don't know why there's an attempt for that to be the case. Okay, but let's take a look. Look at this. A new flexible thermoelectric generator can wrap around pipes, and I quote, and other hot surfaces and convert wasted heat into electricity far more efficiently than previously possible, according to scientists at Penn State and the National Renewable Energy Laboratory, end quote. Penn State, at the and the National Renewable Energy Laboratory, excuse me. You know, Penn State has been directly involved with certain fundings of government programs. And of course, you know, just like with all universities, they're directly associated to top secret government projects and things like this because those are the best academic minds to solve and create these these problems and all that. However, let me make something else clear. Allegedly, this is just one of a handful. One of a handful of individuals that reached out to Sam Harris and a handful of others regarding this particular phenomenon. About how to, you know, describe to the masses the disclosure and the ET UFO, I guess you could say, prominence to the world, one of them was allegedly from Penn State. So do you see what I'm saying here, folks? The timing of things like the intellectual dark web, the way in which different forms of esoteric descriptions from astrophysicists and quantum physicists like Dr. Eric Davis tend to come out so rapidly, right? Now let's take a look. The Rodin solution replaces the binary code with a new code called the binary triplet, which will revolutionize computer operating systems. It will transform physics and astrophysics by finally answering how black holes and pulsars work. How convenient that, again, this was put out in 2012, but interestingly enough, this new system, understanding what life is all about, what it is comprised of, seems to apply to medicine, biology, science, physics, chemistry, astronomy, economics, because once you understand the code of the universe, that can be applied to every angle of life, which is why, again, physicists are finding similarities between the composition of the internet that I'm using right now to make this presentation and what our universe is made out of, and why we also see here that the Rodin solution replaces binary code with a new code that will revolutionize computer operating systems. Just like how I say, for example, it's totally a metaphor, but with respects to this mind control grid, we are living in a mind control system similar to that of running a 2022 Google Chrome browser on a Windows 1995 hardware computer. It's not going to work. You're going to have some parts of that operating system that might perk up, but the hardware itself won't be able to process the power, right? And in this case, it's possible that this solution that Mr. Rodin, that he coined the Rodin solution, could be that upgrade in hardware, but it's been suppressed. Ironically enough, it's been suppressed by individuals that also reached out to those that are part of the intellectual dark web. I'm not trying to create a conspiracy around Sam Harris, Eric Weinstein, Barry Weiss. I'm really not. I want to be very clear about that. The point I'm trying to make is you see the connection between this cognitive dissonance of pretending like there's cognitive dissonance when really it's about suppressing knowledge. Okay, folks. Now, here's the other thing I wanted to bring up as well, too. Space travel will be revolutionized by reactionless drives that are unaffected by the weight they pull, making the present-day combustion engine obsolete. Oh, how convenient. Sounds like anti-gravity, doesn't it? Yeah, okay. The revolution brought on by reactionless drives. Reactionless. Weightless. Anti-gravity. Come on, guys. It's that. Will far surpass, and if I'm wrong, please forgive me, will far surpass the societal changes wrought by the shift from steam engines to the present-day combustion engine. The Rodin solution can even be applied to ending pollution and drought by creating an inexhaustible, non-polluting energy source. Again, going back to the problem with this is that the big oil guys, the big pharma guys, it'll all collapse. So, what do you do when you find out that more and more people, especially young individuals like Mr. Rodin, are finding ways to are finding access points to free energy? You reach out to individuals who are considered free thinkers within that of the control system. Sadly, but true. Like Sam Harris, like Eric Weinstein, like those on the intellectual dark web. You make them shift the narrative of those that are attempting to break free of this duopolistic Republican-Democrat political system. Do you see what I'm saying? So now you have a control within a control within a control circle. Going back again to concentric circles. You then have the control over the control over the control. All right? Now, speaking of control, that then brings us, by the way, to... that brings us to the fall of the Chimera, or the Chimera group. Let me just check here to make sure that we're covering everything. Interphasic inversion for the Chimera group. Yes, there we go. Now, let's take a look at the fall of the Chimera, okay, because this is going to get quite interesting. All right, so let me just see here. All right. This is 2012portal.blogspot.com. Again, 2012, but let's take a look. Time has come to release more intel about the Chimera group. Part of this intel may seem unbelievable for some people, but truth is stranger than fiction. This group, the Chimera group, includes the leaders of the dark forces from the Andromeda galaxy. They came to Earth in humanoid physical bodies 25,000 years ago and quarantined the planet. They have built a scalar electromagnetic fence around the Earth, which they call the Veil, effectively preventing positive ET contact and thus isolating humanity. Then they constructed a vast network of subterranean cities using draconians as slave handlers and reptilians as slaves, and controlled the human population on the surface of the planet from there. This is interesting because, again, this speaks to a higher narrative before the Alpha Draconians allegedly came in and took over, because allegedly the Andromedans, although of course there are bad ones, bad apples, just like with anything in every group in life in general, so to speak, the Andromedans allegedly backed away. Now, I don't want to comment any more on that, because I know there are people in this community that are far more familiar with the chronology and narrative and storyline of this than, the timeline rather, than myself. Take a look at this. Their main strongholds at the time were under Africa, China, and Tibet. They had no direct contact with the surface civilization until the early 20th century. That time frame has seen interesting occult developments. First, in 1917, the Light Forces have formed the Thule Society in Germany. Very soon it was infiltrated by the Archon-controlled Rothschild agent named Adolf Schicklgruber, or Hitler, and became an instrument of the dark, and it further morphed into the Vril Society, which was developing secret German space programs. When the Chimera group saw this, they realized that the surface human population has reached sufficient technological development to reach for the stars and pierce the veil. Before I go on, I just want to say, I'm not saying this is fact. I'm saying that this adds another layer of the complex, affairs within that of human ET history, modern human ET history. To suppress that, by the way, this only has to do with surface dwellers, humans, so to speak. The humans that escaped many, many thousands of years ago to go underground and to these other networks, which also use, in some cases, interphasic pocket dimensional rifts. They don't really care about them, because it's not, I think it has to do, in my humble opinion, about just pure quantity. Would you rather, try to control a handful of souls in these underground networks that have been there and plan to stay there for God knows how long, or would you rather control a clueless, relative to what species on the surface that has way more in population, right? So take a look. When the Chimera group saw this, they realized that the surface human population has reached sufficient technological development to reach for the stars and pierce the veil. To suppress that, they made their first contact with the surface population through Karl Haushofer on his travels to Tibet. After contact was made, Chimera-controlled Haushofer was the main occult force behind the Nazi Germany. After the Nazis have lost World War II, they have been imported into the U.S. through Operation Paperclip, where they formed the backbone of the military-industrial complex, continued to develop their secret space program, and started to build deep underground military bases financed with Yamashita gold. Now, this Yamashita gold, it's hard to say. I don't want to comment. We can also argue very strongly, of course, money laundering, drug money may be used later on. But the Chimera group was behind the scenes, carefully watching the moves of the U.S. military-industrial complex and making sure that the quarantine status of the planet was maintained and kept intact. The growing nuclear arsenal of the negative military was a great concern for the Galactic Federation forces, and they made an experiment to minimize the yield of the thermonuclear bomb at the Castle Coon nuclear test site in 1954. Interesting again, at the same time that there was a restructure of religious hierarchy individuals relative to the Vatican, same time, mid-1950s, right? We did that episode with Dr. Peter, please forgive me, I forgot his last name, but very nice gentleman, about, the Fatima and all that. And then, of course, 1950s, when Eisenhower allegedly signed the Greada Treaty, and you name it. We see here, after the Confederation has successfully decreased the yield of the bomb by almost 90%, the military-industrial complex became afraid and united forces against the perceived threat from the tall whites. This was exactly what the Chimera wanted, because now they have had negative military united worldwide, working on the common goal of maintaining the quarantine. Very strict secrecy protocols were established, and no leaks about deep events which could disrupt the quarantine status were tolerated. This is the reason why you can find no real proof about the existence of ET civilizations anywhere, and most evidence is fabricated by CIA to further confuse the issue. This is also the reason why you cannot find any deep intel on the internet, but just endless recycling of well-known facts instead. Now, keep in mind, folks, this was written in 2012, so, things have changed since then relative to the dark web and all that. But take a look at this. The Chimera group worships the black sun. which is their symbol for the galactic central sun. Their leader is still in possession of a single piece of the black stone, which is a lump of heavy top anti-top quark condensate. It was brought to Earth from Rigel in 1996, the star system Rigel, all right, which is what Alex Collier also mentions as well. The black stone is the center of the primary cosmic anomaly of darkness and is far more dangerous than the Stranglet bomb, as top quarks are much heavier than strange quarks. Okay, the Chimera group had their own network of underground bases until they were very recently cleared out by the Resistance. All right, these bases were connected with a high-speed train system. This could also be, by the way, as well, have to do with the Orion Dracos, the Greys. We could also very strongly argue what I'm reading to you right now, folks, may be a source of disinformation, but there may in fact be legitimate aspects to this relative to the timing of the other connections made here by myself and us, rather, I should say, independently. But take a look at this right over here. The Resistance train system was the one I have seen back in 1977. The existence of the underground train system of the negative military has been leaked to the surface population through this RAND document. Now, for those that are not familiar, I'm going to pull this up very quickly. RAND, the High-Speed Transit System, these documents are right here. Defense Technical Information Center, RAND Corporation, city planning, pollution, urban transportation, all of it. So if anyone would like any of these links, please let me know. Even look, an LA Times article proposes a 10,000 mile per hour tube shuttle network. An LA Times article brought this up in 1972, and nobody comments on it. Nobody says, "Hey, what's going on there? What's happening?" Right? Take a look. LA Times. Here's the paperclip. The paper clipping, June 11th, 1972. LA to New York in half an hour. 10,000 miles per hour tunnel train plan developed. A RAND Corporation physicist has devised a rapid transit system to get you from LA to New York in half an hour for a $50 fare. And by the way, it doesn't require any pollution or anything of the sort, using magneto-leviton trains, which are the same form of propulsion, amongst many others, that Dr. Eric Davis proposed in his 2004 report of different propulsion systems, in addition to the traversable wormhole report that got sent to 6 Draco Drive. Not only that, but take a look at this. The essence of the idea was to dig a tunnel more or less along the present routes of U.S. Highways 66 and 30. U.S. Highway 66, the very famous highway in the United States. I've actually been on it, I believe. They call it the Devil's Highway. Interesting, isn't it? Could there have been a ley line there associated with this? We have to consider all of this, right? Now, you might be saying, Dave, you did not address the part of the episode where you said interphasic inversion fuels the hologram. We talked about interphasic space, but what about interphasic inversion? Take the different pockets of space, folks, that we were just looking at, that we were just covering. All right, this right over here. Take these pockets and flip them. What you would then have, I know it gets confusing. Please forgive me, and I'm trying to explain it in the best way that I could. Imagine if instead of this side of the pocket on the screen here being Earth, and then you walk through, you see where my mouse is, you walk through to go to a void or another parallel or alternate universe dimension, you name it. Imagine if that void was pulled out into our universe in a non-natural artificial way, the same way that you pull your pockets in your jeans or your pants. You pull them out of your pockets when you're trying to wash your clothes, or you want to make sure that the washing machine, that your dryer dries all of it. You pull your pockets inside out. Oh my gosh, that was the word that was the term I was looking for, inside out. Please forgive. My brain gets fogged sometimes, guys. Please forgive me. So it's the same concept as pulling your jean pockets or track pants pockets inside out. Same exact idea here, right? We're looking at the almost identical sort of concept. Now, the reason for all of this is that it seems like this all seems to occur with respects to poltergeist, UFO activity, all of that Dr. Eric Davis mentioned, electron beam welding, what happened at CERN, these chimeras, LA to New York in half an hour. Again, all of this, all of this, we'll see here as well, by the way, also seems to do with the Chimera group, okay, but ultimately something called the witching hour. So we see, according to Wikipedia, in folklore, again, see, it has to be folklore, the witching hour or devil's hour is a time of night that is associated with supernatural events, whereby witches, demons, and ghosts are thought to appear and be at their most powerful. Definitions vary and include the hour immediately after midnight and the time between 3 a.m. and 4 a.m. The term now has a widespread colloquial and idiomatic usage that is associated with human physiology and behavior to more superstitious phenomena such as luck. All right. Now, what's interesting about this is that we'll see over here, the phrase witching hour began at least as early as 1775 in the poem Night and Ode by Reverend Matthew West, though its origins may go further back to 1535, where the Catholic Church prohibited activities during the 3 to 4 a.m. time frame due to emerging fears about witchcraft in Europe. Again, not saying I'm correct, but as we've seen with our series with Micah, as we've seen with our series with Ani, is it possible that this form of the witching hour or could be inverted in a way that could be used positively? And that's not what the Catholic Church wanted, because again, the 15, 16, 1700s were a time of great censorship relative to the Bible. Now, let me be very clear here. I'm not saying to interact at this time of night or this time of the early hours in the morning with these beings. I'm just saying, what if the applicable mentality that's been indoctrinated onto us has made us, you and I, for so many years through our ancestors thinking 3 a.m. is bad and all this stuff, created this? What if we used mass consciousness to formulate a time in which 3 a.m. would actually be a positive hour of healing while we sleep? Interesting, isn't it? Right? And I say that because it's actually been found very, very strongly, if we take a look at this right over here, cds.cern.ch, that within electron beam welding, the vast amounts of experiments that have been most successful have been at quite strange hours of the night. And we can also understand, too, that Bob Lazar mentioned, too, he would be called in at strange hours of the night as well, assuming you believe his story, right? Again, take a look at this, inventorspot.com. CERN scientists set to make contact with parallel universe with Large Hadron Collider. Call this a mind bender of an experiment. A popular atom smasher will soon be turned on at full force so that it might discover and perhaps form small black holes. Oh, you mean like traversable black holes that apparently these aliens used to come and go? What's the big deal with respects to this being covered up? Because it would create a form of free thinking that would then create, again, an overall aspect of, hold on a second, people going, where have I heard this before? What's occurring here? Why is this happening over and over and over again to the point where it seems almost repetitive? So if we jump to disclosurenews.it, the Chimera group allegedly control these 10 major groups: the Bilderberg group, the Ordo Templi Orientis, the Hashashanin, the Hashshatin, the Order of Assassins, the Black Hand, the Knights of the Golden Circle, the Thule Society, which the Nazis used to make contact with, the Sons of Liberty, Skull and Bones, the Illuminati, and the Freemasons. Now, I'm not saying this is factual, all right? But we see here, the Veil. This group includes the leaders of the dark forces from the Andromeda Galaxy. They came to Earth in humanoid physical bodies 25,000 years ago and quarantined the planet. All right? We see here, through the main Archon, they have limited access to the Archons on their etheric plane. Those etheric Archons enforce soul agreements on the members of the Cabal, forcing them to obey the Chimera group. If a certain member of the Cabal is removed, the etheric Archons simply find another host and enforce binding soul agreement upon him or her. In the past, a certain positive group has engaged long-range shooters to remove certain members of the Cabal, and they were not successful, because those Cabal members simply returned to the physical plane in a new clone body, which was already prepared for them in a military base under surveillance of the Chimera group. Again, this is the whole concept of deep underground military bases, there being underground wars, and it not being as simple as just, shooting them physically and biologically, and then them dying and all of that, and these aliens dying and the base is cleared and all that. It has to be done before these beings transfer their soul from one body to another, allegedly. We see here, after 2004, all those clones have been destroyed by the Resistance, and now long-range shooters of the aforementioned positive group would be much more successful in eliminating individual members of the Cabal, and no amount of Blackwater Academy bodyguards would be able to protect them. The Chimera group has put physical strange-lit bombs inside most of the U.S. military bases and some military bases of other nations, and these bombs from the main line of defense these bombs form the main line of defense against the advance of Galactic Federation and resistance movement forces towards the surface of this planet. Allegedly, electron beam welding is what creates and powers, or a form of electron beam welding, a lot of these bombs. Again, another connection there. Let's take a look at this right over here. The final thing. Plasma scalar devices can thus influence our bodies, and the Chimera group uses these devices to attack light warriors and light workers by influencing their body functions, disturbing breathing and heart pulse. They also use plasma scalar lasers to project thought forms into minds of light workers, plasma infrasound to lower the frequency of auric membrane of light workers, and plasma ultrasound devices as ultimate spying and surveillance machines. The resistance is already removing these plasma scalar devices with full speed. There is a full-scale war ongoing between the positive military and the Chimera group worldwide. We can argue very strongly, we can use process of elimination and break this down to there's a full-on war between soul beings and AI beings. We as humans are just sandwiched in between that. Not in a bad way, but we're just sandwiched in between that. Now, here's something else I wanted to point out quite significantly as well too. They use plasma scalar lasers to project thought forms into minds of light workers. All right. Now, again, it doesn't always have to be light workers, but plasma scalar devices can thus influence our physical bodies. All right. What does that remind us of? What the heck does that remind us of if we really think about it? Precognitive sentient phenomena. That also reminds us of what Dr. Eric Davis said here, again, about how these scientists and individuals, even independent researchers, don't want to touch the concept of some type of poltergeist consciousness effect, if you will. It's too frightening for them. They won't be able to sleep well at night. Which, to be honest, if there's certain individuals that don't want to learn about this, so be it, granted. But with all due respect, don't stop the rest of us from wanting to learn about it, right? So, with that being said, I hope you folks enjoyed this episode. I hope the explanation and the breaking down of all of these concepts were not confusing. I really tried my best to order this in a way that would have been able to, again, bring it full circle, so to speak. Actually, sorry, one more thing, folks. I just wanted to say, going back to telepathy in a form of quantum communication, right? We'll see here that using advanced quantum communication technology, light particles in the human brain can be entangled, and once entangled, outside sources could then input data into the brain, interfacing with consciousness. Now, what's interesting, however, is that after quantum, I believe it's omni. After quantum entanglement or being quantum present, it's being omnipresent. Now, that uses geometry and certain forms of science that we probably can't even conceive relative to my example of concentric circles, of it appearing magic to us in this dimension because we need to ascend our physical and more so our spiritual and mental forms of our bodies to ascend and realize that what we thought was magic in this dimension is justified via that of geometric, mathematical, scientific understanding in a higher dimension. But this concept of using advanced quantum communication technology, light particles, remember, light particles, whether it's from the members only episodes on Patreon of light influencing people's behavior, of light, photons dematerializing then rematerializing, teleportation, all of that, bending light from visibility, all of this allegedly occurs quite prominently within that of the times that are known to be the witching hour. Ironically enough, all quite conveniently too, generally within that of the Department of Energy, as it's rumored to be. Not only that, but going back to the Luc Montagnier DNA teleportation, I got to be careful because this will become a public episode eventually, so I can't say too much about Mr. Montagnier relative to what he said about the beep boops these days. But we'll see here that this same type of DNA molecule teleportation utilizes the exact same forms of scientific, philosophical apparatuses that we've been covering for this entire episode. So with that being said, folks, thank you so very much for watching or listening, and we'll catch you all very, very soon. Cheers.